Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us here in part 2 of this 3-part series by the PMI Institute. Bengaluru is one of my favorite cities, and I hope to have a very enriching conversation today. And maybe we can start by talking about the Vision India as has been propagated by the government and the mission statement that they've put out in terms of Vision India. And since we have representatives from the private as well as the public sector, talk about how the two can really work together to try and achieve some of those objectives, and particularly with regards employment, which is something that both the public as well as the private sector keenly look at. And maybe I could start with you, sir.
Sunanda, as you said, government has been very keen on the Vision India program, and the smart city is one of the very critical components of it. And in smart city, the most enterprising part of it is the public-private partnership, in which we bring in the best practices in the industry and then get it married to the processes in the government. Yes, there are challenges in it, and there has always been a challenge in the PPP model. But what we need to understand is that the project management per se, from the government's perspective, is a little different. And therefore, we need to focus on what the expectation of the government is and what is the expectation of the private partner. And there needs to be a change in the attitude, obviously in the form of the government officers or the government system in which the way we function, and understand that the private partner can give us best practices, technology, but the domain is with us. And therefore, we need to be an absolutely active partner in that. That is how we need to move.
So I want to pick up on what you're saying and throw this question open to the panel. While there is understanding that there has to be equal participation between public and private, why is that not happening of late? For example, we were very briefly discussing about PPP projects. What is it that's going to take PPP projects to ensure that they're actually successful and the reasons for which they've been set up are actually being achieved?
If you look at the recent articulation by the Prime Minister, his dream for 21st century India, that's his vision. It's actually articulation of certain aspirations. He's put in those 8 points on the 25th of September, I thought, at Kozhikode. This then would have to be translated into a portfolio of programs, and then comes a number of projects that will support these programs and so on. Now, in this, everyone would have to play a role, including the private sector. And when you detail these things in terms of programs and projects, then that will have frameworks that will enable multiple stakeholders to come on board. That, I think, is the way forward.
Sure.
So, Sunanda, if I may. So, I actually studied the websites of some of the key programs under Vision India, right? So, be it smart cities, be it Make in India, be it Digital India. They've actually done a good job of thinking about the details and laying out specifically what needs to be done. If you haven't studied it, I would encourage you to go and look up those projects. They're very impressive. But the challenge is project management and execution converts a strategy into outcome, right? How well we are able to take each one of those large programs and translate them into manageable projects and get them executed within time, within the resource constraints, and deliver the required results will make the difference between success of Vision India or not being so successful.
Also, I think important is to create a one success case. I mean, as a point, I think. And you mentioned about the employment. I think if we have a one good success case, replicating the, I mean, we have a references of past where we had a success in PPP model as well. And if we could take those references, and as Mr. Gopinath said, private and public partnership happens where government leverages the experiences of public enterprises to make them success. And if we have a very good success story to start with, I'm sure that it will follow on with more success stories, and employment as part of it will automatically happen. As
I just want to take forward what Gopinath was also saying, and Shojit, maybe bring you in on this. He was talking about the best practices that are really available as far as project management is concerned in India. Companies like yourself, and maybe I could ask some of the other representatives from the IT companies to speak on that as well. Project management and the best practices that you see within companies like yourself, what can possibly the public sector learn from?
So I think there are a couple of points here. But first of all, like Mr. Gopinath said, the large complex projects that many of organizations like ours run, they deliver a lot of learnings in terms of, the various classic dimensions of project management, managing stakeholders, which is probably the biggest thing in a public project, managing risk, information sharing. But to make it happen, and this is our experience of running some global public-private projects as well, when we have talked about Smarter Cities campaign in global cities, they're at two levels. One is at a local administration level, we have seen, a larger involvement, accountability. Again, Mr. Mishra also mentioned that. That's unquestionable. And second, from an execution point of view, what we brought in, what was the success factor? What an organization like us bring in is, in our, let me say, mindset, if I may use that word, we think in terms of project management. We talk in terms of what's the action, how do we get it done, what's the risk. And I think my key point here is we need to build that mindset within the public organizations also.
Absolutely. So there is a vision. Vision is out there. The challenge is, how do I bring this into a minimum viable scope and deliver it in a timeline that addresses some of the key concerns of the stakeholders. The challenge is that, many a times we don't even know who our stakeholders are. We probably try to cater to a particular group or segment of the society, whereas the impact of this is probably somewhere else. The people who are impacted are somewhere else. So you need to have the right stakeholder management and see what is that scope that I can deliver. And then, of course, you can build on it. You can obviously have a template, and you can build on that template as you move forward to replicate it across. But some of those tenets of project management, as was specified, is something that we need to have, and it's in our genes, it's in our working on a day in, day out, which is what we could contribute from.
If I may talk about the contribution from the technology industry. First of all, get the basics right? For the right type of project, get the right type of manager. Depending on the project's complexity, size, etc., get the right person to manage it. Rigorous scope management, right? Definition of scope management. And an important point that I'll stress from the private sector, which can be copied in the public sector, is extensive usage of technology. Project management tools, collaboration tools, social media-based interaction tools these days, real-time data updates, regular project reviews, progress reviews, and corrective actions in case there are delays in the project.
Yeah, I was just adding on from what Mr. Gopinath said. I think before we even think about project management and how Vision India can be brought down into small projects, I think we need to sit and think about how accountability is brought into this whole thing, because I think all of us from the private sector are well aware of the whole accountability and consequence part of it. But I think that whole thinking has to kind of percolate down into the other side, to the government side, especially in something like a PPP project. And like he said, we can have all the tools, we can have all the systems and the best practices. But I think that whole attitude change is what I think will really make the difference, especially something like Vision India, where we are talking about a large number of projects.
So I'll come back to this topic on accountability, but I just want to follow up on something that you said, Shojit, in terms of planning, and that's something that you talk about very closely and you're associated with very closely. Do you see enough understanding of why there needs to be a study in some sense of planning as an art, as a science, and whether that's being seen enough in the private sector?
Yeah, I think what you said is right in terms of importance of planning, which is the basis for all the activities. But before I touch upon that for a minute, I want to just go back to your point about employability. Anderson Consulting did a study globally, and the part of India said that we need 300,000 people in project management in the country. The reason why it's coming up is because project management, like the other panelists were mentioning here today, it's more of a life skill. The skills which you use in project management is applicable whether it's personal life or professional life. What we need to really have this detailed planning process in place, followed up with monitoring of the same process. Because government at large is never ever a project execution agency. Government is always a project sponsoring agency. So they need to ensure that the agency which is executing the project has all the requisite project management skills.
Can I comment on this? Reducing Vision of India to just great project management and executing projects greatly, I think is reducing that problem to too small a thing. There is a missing piece. If you look at the 8 things that the Prime Minister has articulated, it is an aspiration. That aspiration is towards solving 8 problems. So, projects, while executed, should result in solving and in line with the end purpose. So, where planning comes in is that what are those big 8 things that I need to solve and how do I get there? And that then gets translated into programs and projects.
You've made an interesting point, although I think it's going to be a little contrarian to what the rest of the panel want to say, and maybe I could ask you to respond to it, Raj.
No, I completely agree with him, and there's no disagreement at all. The global standard in project management, which is the project management body of knowledge, does state very clearly that for a project manager, the first step of project management is planning. So planning is a very, very integral part of project management. It's just not the execution. I mean, execution is also important, it's as equally important, but planning plays a big role. So there's no disagreement that the planning is very important. But today what's also happening in addition to all this, and to his point, most mature organizations are now looking at benefits realization. So we are looking at a scenario where has a project met the desired outcome?
Again, I totally agree. But I think what he's talking about is the solution. In a typical project management, we start, when the solution is done, we have a scope and we execute. So there's no disagreement. Every problem stated in Vision India has to be solution. I think the area, it's just one piece, what you're talking about now. It's not the solution. It's that once a solution has been defined, can you execute it well? For example, if everyone agrees that the solution to that commuting problem is a metro rail on outer ring road, let's say all the right people have thought through and agreed. Now the project manager's job is to do it within a time, budget and scope. And I think we're focusing on one piece of that. We're not, I don't think we're discussing solving Vision India, but we're saying if someone says, and all the wise people say that this is the right way to do it, what is the best way then to execute?
Sure. So execution is something that I'm hearing quite a bit from the panel. Arun was also talking about it. Mr. Sharma, I know that execution, particularly in PPP projects, is something that you have very strong views on, especially as far as private industry can be involved. What solutions do you think that we can have to the existing problems that we do?
If you really look at wherever private sector is allowed to function, they are doing their job reasonably well. It is only in those areas which concerns the citizens of India and where the infrastructure related issues we come across on a day-to-day basis, whether it is transportation, whether it is good condition of the roads, whether it is providing the housing kind of a thing, whatever the vision, whatever the project management, which at the federal level, at the state level, corporation level, when it is getting executed, it is not being done neither within the time nor within the cost nor the kind of a quality which we expect today as a 21st century citizen.
Possibly infrastructure is the one area where project management is felt the most and the need for project management is felt the most. And maybe I can bring you in at this point, Mr. Mishra, and talk about, while the government is actively talking about smart cities, cities of the future, urban planning, infrastructure, there is clearly a mismatch to some extent, especially as far as urban planning is concerned. I want your views on that.
First of all, the focus on urban is very, very recent. Smart City is the first initiative in independent India where an outcome-driven approach to urban planning and urban, I would say, revival is being thought through. So our capacity of our urban bodies is very limited. We don't have it. Then people like us, some of us who have kind of taken upon ourselves that we are going to augment that capacity. So that's the challenge in public infrastructure, multiplicity of the agencies, interagency coordination challenges, and then permissions and procedures and process, and the lack of competence and capacity.
Everything that you spoke of in terms of capacity, in terms of deciding or putting up the outcome, monitoring, managing of resources, timelines, all of that is something that would be very easily driven if we have the right system in place, or if we have the right IT software in place. One of the key concerns that remained unanswered here was in terms of accountability. And accountability would come if there is a transparency, which by default the software provides. So if you have the right level of transparency across all the aspects that we have spoken of, you would see definitely a higher level of accountability, whether it is in the private space or in the public space.
If there's one thing that I think we can pick up from the conversations we've had today is accountability, and that seems to be the chief thing that all of us are talking about in terms of Vision India and project management. Thank you all very much for being with us here today. Thank you.
The third CXO Roundtable in our three-part series, presented by the Project Management Institute in association with the Economic Times, was held in Pune. The panelists, who represented a wide range of sectors from real estate to healthcare to manufacturing, along with the industrial vertical and the technology space, shared their views on project management, indispensable for Vision India.
So we've come to the conclusion that there are, in fact, not only challenges, but deep-rooted mind-shift changes required for project management frameworks to really be implemented across the board. So what resources and support system does that mandate?
Right. So I think there are two key aspects about this when you try to convert your vision into execution and then actual results. One is, of course, the skill set, which is of the I would say conductor of the orchestra, if you just want to give an analogy. You may not be a master in each of the pieces, which is the cross-functional pieces, but you should really know how they work and operate, number one. Second, you should know what makes things work so that you can fit the jigsaw puzzle right, and what are the milestones at which you are going to measure that, right? Now, this is a skill which is very important that the project manager should have, and I think PMI has got good metrics, and I'll wait for your comment on that. So this is one part. The other part is to make your project manager successful, and this onus really lies on the respective organizations, right? And there are benchmarks across the world on how you do that, but it's all about process.
I think the government can play extremely crucial role here to ensure that project management becomes a core curriculum in both engineering and management schools in the country today, because it's extremely important that people who come out, who graduate, who come into the workforce are equipped with this knowledge.
Well, to take that point forward, Devashish, do you believe that structured project management training should be a part of the corporate workplace? Is that where it belongs?
The need is very huge, very huge. So I don't think exactly that by the corporate initiative only you can solve this problem. It has to come basically, if you see all the hearings, it has to come into the ecosystem itself.
Across organizations, you celebrate the sales guys, you celebrate the people whose output can be measured very easily. In project management, while you can track budget and you can track time and you can track quality, there isn't a single measure across all. And currently what my team is working on is some sort of a model where we can actually, you can give a score to a project, which takes into account all these three parameters. And if you get whatever the number is, you can test the number yourself and you can see how you're performing, just as a sales team would be able to check their performance relative to their overall goal.
And a question for the whole panel here. According to you, is India well poised to become a project management hub going forward?
Few of them who have worked abroad and done project management outside and have seen the world, and they know what are the constraints and what are the challenges outside world when they work for MNCs. Few of them are, I will say, are getting ready, because as he rightly said that the gambit of the project management is changing.
Maybe I'll add to that.
Please.
So the way the project manager lives his life in the country, with the amount of uncertainties and difficulties with some of the various stakeholders, it really builds a skill in a very different dimension, right? Which normally is not a skill which one gets if you're working internationally. Right?
It becomes a crisis management, more of a crisis management.
And that's an important skill. So the guys who have mastered that skill and also are very good on the process, when we have sent a few of these project managers to our global organizations to work there on either bubble assignments or transfers, we really find that them excelling as compared to the benchmark which is there.
We have the capability to deliver, provided we inculcate, incorporate, internalize some basic ethics about project management. It's like almost like it is in 20 years back, if somebody had told us that India would be one of the leading IT services organizations in the world, countries in the world, people would have been laughing. But I think today we have a potential where project management can become the next wave for India.
If I may just add one point to that. I think that demographic dividend is definitely there in India's favor. The other thing which I would like to add is there's the growing IT enablement of project management is where India has a huge advantage. The good news is that the other domains, other industries are now in a position to compete with IT industry, and fortunately and unfortunately the IT sheen is kind of wearing off lately. So people are recognizing this. So talented individuals are available. They're coming out and wanting to make a difference. And good news is that they're also IT aware, IT savvy. So given this, all these factors, I'm very optimistic that what you asked, whether we can become a hub, absolutely we can.
Rohit, your thoughts?
So I think, so the good news is I think we can. I certainly believe in the capability and in the resilience and the ability to really make great strides in the youngsters in India. I think if we do have certain islands of excellence and some very good individuals in all of our organizations, but if we want to really make this as a wave, if we really want to make this as very, very broad-based, it's going to take a lot of work, but I completely believe that it's possible. I don't think that it can happen unless it's shepherded and spearheaded in an extremely proactive, well project managed way.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your insights, and we wish you continued success.